Tonight we continue a series of interviews with candidates in this year's election for City Council. Our guest is a candidate from Dorchester who's one of the finalists running at large. We'd like to welcome Julia Mejia. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Julia, I want to ask you, when you go up to a prospective voter and you want them to support you, what do you tell them to get across that you're ready to serve on the council?
Well, I've been serving my whole entire life. Since I was 9 years old, I've been of service to my community. I was the official translator and advocate for everybody in the neighborhood. So I'm already used to fighting and looking for the resources that my community needed. So I've devoted my entire life to this work. I'm a community organizer. I've launched several civic engagement initiatives here in the city of Boston designed specifically to engage those who are least likely to become more actively engaged in decisions that were being made on our behalf. So I think that I'm more than ready, and actually I've been doing the work anyways, and whenever there's an issue in the city of Boston, whether it's a parent or someone who's coming from re-entry or someone who's dealing with a housing issue, I'm the one who's always traffic control. Go over here, talk to this person, navigate this resource. So in many ways, I've been doing this work my entire life. And so this is just an opportunity to take the work that I've been doing to a whole nother level by going on the inside.
I'm hearing a lot of buzz about this election now, mainly around the fact that there are 3 Latino candidates with a chance of getting a seat on the council. Is that something you bring up to people to get them to vote for you?
No, not really. So, I've been focusing a lot of my energy in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, and low-income communities and mixed, diversity. So for me, it's not just about the whole idea of having a Latino representation. It's really about making sure that we have people who represent us through socioeconomic status, through lived experiences, that we have different perspectives and we have different lived experiences, is really creating an opportunity to show that there is a nice slate of opportunities for us to look at. We have Ricardo, who's running in District 5, and he has been pounding the pavement and talking about racial justice and equity. Alejandra as well. So it's really about not just the fact that we're Latinos, because I'm an Afro-Caribbean Latina, I claim my Black roots, right? So I'm very committed to the Black and Brown conversation, and I'm very committed to uplifting the issues that Black communities have been facing here historically. So I just don't talk about the Latino conversation because I've never been the type of person that just focuses on one. Now, I will say is that there are certain communities specifically in the Latino community that don't speak English. So I talk about my immigrant experience. I talk about what it was like for me to be an English language learner and how to navigate the city of Boston through that lens, and how it's important to have representation from an immigrant perspective and from being Latina coming here from the Dominican Republic. So depending on the doors that I'm in, I'm able to relate to my own personal lived experience. But as a bigger conversation, I've always been about all, and to me, all means all. So I include everybody's lived experience in my work.
I want to bring up that experience because there is a national test with some results about the Boston Public Schools lately. One of the results, I think, was that Boston had the second highest achievement gap between Latinos and other students, at least white students. What do you see yourself doing about that?
Well, I was an English language learner. Right? My mom did not speak English, and that's why I was able to get away with a lot, including not going to school and intercepting every phone call that she received to say, I'm here, everything's all good. I think that for me, I'm part of also the ELL task force for the Boston Public Schools. So really looking at how we can support our English language learners, because a lot of our students come here already with interrupted English, interrupted education, because they're coming here from different countries and already are functioning at 2 to 3 grade levels below. So really, how do we pour in more resources and funding to support students who are recent arrivals? I think that that's really key. And then as well as looking at the fact that we don't have a lot of representation, like educators who look like us in Boston Public Schools, nor do we have the leadership. So I think really increasing the diversity among the Latino representation in the Boston Public Schools might help shift some of that as well.
I want to ask you about one issue that has sort of divided the field of candidates, and that's in housing. Rent control is a question that's very controversial. There's one slate of candidates backed by a property owners group. You're on the slate backed by Right to the City. So what do you want voters to make of that?
So I support rent control, right? For me, my mom and I bounced from place to place, and it wasn't until I was in the 5th grade that we had a stable place to live where I can stay in one school for the complete year. And that's the reality for a lot of families here in the city of Boston today. They can't afford to live in the city anymore. And in fact, over 5,000 students in the city of Boston alone are homeless. That means they don't have a place to lay their head in, or they're bouncing from place to place and couch surfing. And so the reality is that we need to be more aggressive about supporting initiatives like rent control, because that will help stabilize the market. And I think it's the how we implement rent control. So I'm really focusing on making sure that we look at how do we support smaller landlords, mom and pop, right, landlords who have been here forever and have 1 or 2 properties and are struggling to pay their property taxes. How can we help subsidize, right, and provide them tax incentives so that they can reduce their rents, so that those who are renting can then save some money. The ones that I'm really targeting are the big developers, the big ticket items, right, the ones that come here with big dreams of luxurizing the whole entire city. I'm thinking about how do we make sure that we hold those type of landlords accountable to reducing their rents so that our people can stay here.
Well, with big developers, there are a lot of candidates who want them to set aside more money for affordable housing. There's only so much you can get them to do. How much do you think they ought to be doing?
Well, right now, the IDP, which is the Inclusionary Development Policy, is set at 13%. And what I would like to see is developers building up to 50% of affordable housing. Because I believe that if you're not building for us, then I have to ask, who are you building for? And people are being displaced every single day. So I'm pushing for more of an aggressive IDP because I believe that that's what the city needs. We don't need incremental change. But more importantly, 6 of the parents that are part of my network, which I launched an organization called C-Plan, over the last year and a half have been displaced and now live in Brockton. But they have to still commute and work in Boston. So we're creating further financial hardship for people who can no longer live in the city of Boston. And so that's why I believe that we need to hold developers accountable to a higher percentage of IDP so that we can reflect the needs of the city.
Sometimes, I'm sure you've heard these complaints in the neighborhoods that people are unhappy with city decisions about what can be developed. Yes.
Oh, you have heard such a thing?
And even when they want more to be built, they have a problem with how it's built.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to tell you this.
What should be done about that?
So I believe, right, nothing about us without us is for us, right? And this is my mantra, is that oftentimes developers come to our neighborhood and they show us these big, beautiful plans, and then they want us to react and say, here's what we want to build. They've already made their decision. I would love to see it in reverse, is that we create a community-centered approach to planning and design, and we define for ourselves what we'd like to see built in our communities, and then we identify who are the developers that are willing to do this in collaboration with us. And right now, that's not how it works. I think that looking at how we can work with our neighborhood civic associations, how we can work with local nonprofits and activists in the city of Boston and have a more community-centered approach to building. And then also have a civilian community, a community review board, where we're the ones who are helping to decide what gets zoned, in terms of zoning and approval process. I think that we need to have folks who from diverse economic statuses and people who really have no special interest in mind in these decision-making processes. But right now, that's not what it looks like.
One more area, transportation. Anything that you'd like to see that we don't have already that would make things better?
Well, everybody's riding that Woo train, right? Everybody is like supporting the free tea. I think I would love to see when we think about transportation, I would also love to see creating more of an infrastructure to making sure like neighborhoods like Mattapan, certain parts of Hyde Park and West Roxbury has a more reliable transportation. There are a lot of late night workers who, low-wage workers in particular, who can't afford an Uber after a certain time. Like, how can we create more late-night service? It's not just for people who are trying to go clubbing, but there are people who need to get to work and home from work that we can help support by adding more dedicated bus lines or creating more trains in our neighborhoods. Those are the things that I think about in terms of transportation. And transportation, it's not just about public transportation, right? We also have to think about public safety as it relates to transportation. I was door knocking recently somewhere in Rosendale, and there was a family, and they were really concerned because their daughter now was going to be having to take the bus to that Boston Latin Academy. And the family, they were white, and they were worried about the safety. And then I said, people in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, we're also worried about public transportation and safety. But what would happen if we all had the same conversation around public transportation and safety? Then maybe we might see things change. But right now, everybody in the city seems like everybody's fighting for their own issues, but we're not having one conversation and about the ways that we could all be working collectively to hold the city accountable to the needs, no matter where you happen to live. And that's the type of leadership that I'd like to see as a community organizer, is like that real community building and that centered approach to moving everyone forward.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Don't forget, November 5th is the election. I'm number 4 on the ballot. Okay. And I hope that you consider giving me one of your 4 votes.
Thank you. Julia Mejia, candidate for Boston City Council at Large.